Hello again, I'm Doye Agama. Welcome to this second episode in our series, introducing us to Christian philosophy. I hope you enjoyed our introduction to the various areas of philosophy in the last episode. This segment introduces the original meaning of philosophy as loving wisdom, acknowledging that people can be clever while establishing that God's wisdom is infinitely higher than human wisdom. For more on the hierarchy or levels of wisdom, you could choose to read some of the following. Bishop St. Augustine, an early church father, wrote on the divine illumination theory that human reason requires divine light. John Calvin, a Reformed Protestant, was a lawyer with a good theological education. He wrote about epistemic humility, or the limitations of human knowledge, and the sensus divinitatis, the greatness of God's knowledge. Søren Kierkegaard, a Lutheran existentialist, was also a trained theologian, and he wrote about the leap of faith, or trusting God beyond our rational knowledge. There has been an ancient quest for wisdom. The word philosophy comes from two ancient Greek words, philein, meaning to love, and Sophia, meaning wisdom. A philosopher, then, is literally a lover of wisdom, someone who doesn't just want to know facts, but who has a deep, passionate desire to understand life, truth, and reality itself. Think about it this way. If you love someone, you don't just want to know their name and address, you want to understand their heart, their dreams, their character, you want to get to know them, you want to spend time with them. That's what the ancient philosophers were doing with wisdom. They were pursuing wisdom, longing for it, falling in love with wisdom. And this wasn't just abstract thinking in ivory towers. These ancient seekers understood that wisdom was meant to be a wholeness approach to life. They asked the big questions like, why do we exist? How should we live? What can we truly know? What really matters? These are the questions that keep many of us awake at night. Questions that every human heart wrestles with at some time or another. For some other lovers of wisdom, you could read Bishop Bonaventure, a Franciscan Catholic. He wrote on affective epistemology, that is, our wills and emotions being part of our search, our love for wisdom. Father Origen, one of the early church fathers, wrote on spiritual interpretation and passionate pursuit of divine truth with fasting, prayer, and spiritual growth. Vladimir Lossky of the Eastern Orthodox Church was not a priest, but he was very highly educated in theology and became the dean of a Theological College in Paris. He wrote on the apophatic theology and mystical union with divine wisdom. That means that we can only really know God and His wisdom through unity with Him. There are limits to human wisdom, and here's where the story takes an interesting turn. Jesus Himself acknowledged that sometimes worldly people, or people in the world, can be quite clever in their own sphere. He said, "The children of this world are in their generation wiser than the children of light." Luke 16, verse 8. Have you ever noticed how even a dishonest person can be incredibly shrewd, maybe in closing a deal or in cheating someone? Have you ever noticed how someone who is scheming negative, even evil things can be remarkably clever in their manipulations? But the Bible also makes something crystal clear. There's a vast difference between being clever and being wise, between earthly smarts and divine wisdom. The Apostle Paul puts it beautifully. He wrote, "For the wisdom of this world is foolishness with God." 1 Corinthians chapter 3 and verse 19. It's a bit like comparing a child's crayon drawing to the work of a master artist. The child may have great potential. They may be gifted. They may be talented. Their drawing may be very clever, very creative for their age. But when you see the works of great masters of painting and sculpture, Michelangelo, for example, you realize you're looking at an entirely different level of artistry. So human wisdom at its best is like the crayon drawing. It has its place, it has its value, but it pales in comparison to the divine masterpiece of God's wisdom. On cleverness versus wisdom, try Blaise Pascal. A Jansenist Catholic, he was a mathematician, a physicist, and a philosopher. He wrote of the spiritual geometry or spirit of geometry, meaning logical deduction, versus the spirit of finesse, which was an intuitive wisdom. Archbishop John Chrysostom of the Eastern Orthodox Church wrote a critique of worldly sophistication in favor of gospel simplicity. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, a Lutheran Protestant pastor, taught that we must choose between cheap grace or costly discipleship, on a surface level or a transformative wisdom. God's wisdom towers above human wisdom. The prophet Isaiah captures this beautifully. He wrote, "For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts." Isaiah 55, verse 9. When you look up at the night sky and try to grasp the vastness of space, you begin to get a sense of how much higher God's wisdom is than ours. Think of the smartest person you know. Maybe a brilliant doctor, an innovative engineer, a wise grandparent. Now consider that all of human wisdom combined is like a single drop of water compared to the ocean of God's understanding. Read Job 11, 7-9. This isn't meant to make us feel small or insignificant, but to help us realize where true wisdom is found. To return full circle to God's greater wisdom, you could read St. Thomas Aquinas, Dominican Catholic. He was a priest and declared a doctor of the Church. That is one of the great theologians of the Church. He wrote about analogical reasoning, divine attributes, or words we use for humans that may not have the same exact meaning about God. Saint Gregory of Nazianzus was an Eastern Orthodox priest. He also said, "We can truly know little about God, and our theological knowledge and language is limited." Karl Barth, a Reformed Protestant, was a pastor. He taught on the wholly other nature of God that cannot be studied by comparing Him, that is God, to human nature, even though we are in His image and likeness. In today's lecture, we've seen that philosophy originally meant loving wisdom, philosophers, representing a passionate pursuit of understanding life's deepest questions. Ancient philosophers, secular and Christian, courted wisdom with passionate intensity, seeking wholeness rather than divided facts. But there is still a crucial distinction between worldly cleverness and divine wisdom. Jesus did acknowledge that worldly people can be shrewd in their sphere. However, we must not take that out of context. The whole of Scripture reveals that human wisdom, even at its best, is like a child's crayon drawing compared to a great masterpiece. In today's lesson, Christian thinkers from various traditions helped us illuminate these concepts. You can read more about them to take your studies further. Ultimately, we are reminded that all human wisdom combined is but a drop compared to the ocean of God's infinite understanding. And yet, we can see that the Bible commands us, for example, in Proverbs chapter 4 and verse 7, that wisdom is the principal thing. Therefore, get wisdom and get understanding. What are we to conclude from everything we have learned in this lecture? It seems that wisdom, in the proper context, within the biblical framework, properly pursued by us, is important to God for our relationship with Him, for our personal, intellectual, and spiritual development, and also for us to walk and work wisely in this world and in the world to come. I'm Archbishop Doye Agama. I'm your servant for Christ and His kingdom. Join us here at the Christian Way of Life Church for the next episode, where we'll talk more about the way we approach wisdom today. See you there.